Hello, and welcome to this Level 4 podcast focusing on budgeting. I'm Gareth. I'm the Managing Director of First Intuition, and we're a college that focuses on AAT and other accountancy training. In the last few years, we've been really delighted to win the UK Accountancy College of the Year in both 2010 and 2012. I was really delighted to be awarded the UK Lecturer of the Year in 2011. And more recently, we were nominated for Study Resource of the Year in 2013. I've been training AAT students for nearly 20 years and have helped thousands of students get through their exams. If you've got any questions, I'm always happy to answer them. You've got my email address there, garethjohn@fi.co.uk. If you've got any questions at all, whether it's about budgeting, whether it's about level 4 of your AAT, whether it's about other accountancy studies. I know an awful lot of level 4 students progress on to other qualifications like ACCA or CIMA or Chartered Accountancy, and I've been teaching all of those for many, many years as well. Now, this series of regular podcasts is designed to try and focus on some areas that students often find quite challenging in their assessments. Since the AAT introduced computer-based assessments with the new qualification a couple of years ago, it's allowed them to gather a lot of detailed statistics about which papers students are finding more difficult and which tasks in those papers are proving challenging. And so these podcasts are trying to just pick up on a few of these areas and just talk about them in a little bit of detail. Well, we're going to be focusing on the budgeting paper from level 4, and particularly looking at how we can deal with calculations on budgeting purchases as part of the budgeting assessment. Very likely you'll see several tasks asking you to come up with forecast figures. And when we're looking at budgeting for purchases of materials, the two complications that students tend to find a bit difficult to deal with is wastage. You can imagine in any production environment there'll be scraps and off-cart and defects and breakages. Basically a lot of material will end up in the bin. Now, if you have wastage of materials, you can perhaps imagine that you will need to purchase more than you're actually planning to use because you need to account for the amounts that are going to end up in the bin. And as well as wastage, we need to think about changes in the level of inventory. If you want to increase the amount of inventory in your storeroom, you'll need to purchase more than you were planning to use. Well, let's have a look at a little example. And this is quite typical actually of some of the stuff you'll see in tasks in this assessment. So we've got a company, they're budgeting to produce 100,000 units of product G during October. Each unit requires 15 kilograms of material. We're then told that 25% of material is wasted and presumably ends up in the bin. The company has inventory on the 1st of October, so at the beginning of the month, of 100,000 kilograms, and they wish to have 125,000 kilograms at the end of the month. And we're going to come up with a budget for how much material will need to be purchased during October. So the example's fairly short and sweet, but it's got a couple of complications here we'll need to be a bit careful about. So why don't you pause me for a few minutes, see if you can make sense of the numbers in this example, and see if you can come up with an answer. How much material do you think they would need to purchase? So why don't you pause me for a few minutes, have a go at that, and then restart me and we can compare notes. Well, let's have a think about how we would deal with this one. Well, I'm going to start by considering the usage of materials. Now, the usage of materials will be based on the number of units we're planning to make. So we were told we were going to produce 100,000 units times the unit usage. So we're told that each unit needed 15 kilograms of material. So in order to produce 100,000 units, we will want to use 1.5 million kilograms of material. Now that's a reasonable starting point, but this is the good kilograms we'll be using to generate good production. You've got to bear in mind we've got this wastage. Wastage they're expecting at 25% of the material. Now that means that they're going to waste material. I basically need to have 1.5 million kilograms left after the wastage. So after some materials ended up in the bin, I still need to have 1.5 million kilograms. Otherwise, I'm not going to have enough to produce 100,000 units. Now, if wastage is 25%, this is where you've got to be very, very careful. And this is where students tend to make a classic mistake. What students will often do is they'll take the 1.5 million kilograms of usage and they'll multiply that by 25%, which actually gives here 375,000 kilograms. That's actually not quite correct, and I'll show you why. If I was to multiply 1.5 million kilograms by 25%, I get 375,000 kilograms. And logically, if I'm wasting that amount, I'll need to purchase more. So I might think, well, I'll therefore need to purchase 1,875,000 kilograms, because that way, after I've wasted 375,000, I've got my 1.5 million. But the 25% wastage we would always assume is based on the total that we're using. Now, if I take 1,875,000 times 25%, that gives me a figure of 468,750 kilograms. And when I've wasted that, I'm not going to be left with 1.5 million kilograms. So don't multiply the 1.5 million kilograms by 25%. What you've got to imagine is that if we're losing 25% of the total material, the 1.5 million kilograms therefore needs to be 75% of what we started with. So to work out the usage after the wastage, if I take 1.5 million kilograms, divide that by 75% or divide it by 0.75, I get that coming to a need for a total of 2 million kilograms. So after allowing for the wastage, I would actually be using 2 million kilograms. And suddenly the figures actually make sense. Because if I waste 25% of 2 million kilograms, well, 25% of 2 million kilograms is 500,000 kilograms, leaves me the 1.5 million I need. So in this situation, if I'm wasting 25%, I'll therefore be left with 75%. So the 1.5 million needs to be 75% of what I started with. So divide the 1.5 million by 0.75 gives me the starting point. Can you perhaps imagine if the wastage was 20%, I'd have divided the 1.5 million kilograms by 0.8 or 80%. If the wastage was 40%, well then I'd divide by 0.6 because I'd want to be left with 60%. So I reckon I'm actually going to be using a total of 2 million kilograms of material, so that once I've wasted some of it and once some of it's gone in the bin, I've still got the 1.5 million kilograms that I need. So that's the first complication. We need to consider the wastage. We've then got inventory. Now, if you look at the inventory here, they're going to have inventory at the beginning of the month of 100,000 kilograms and at the end of the month of 125,000 kilograms. Now, different ways you can adjust for the figures here, but if I take the usage of 2 million, I would tend to add on any closing inventory required because we need to make sure we've got that in place. So if I add on 125,000 kilograms, that takes me to 2,125,000 kilograms in total. That will give me enough for the 2 million that I need for production plus the 125,000 of closing inventory. But I can then deduct the opening inventory, because obviously if I've got stuff already in the storeroom, I don't need to buy it. And the opening inventory was 100,000 kilograms. So if I deduct the opening inventory, I'm left with 2,025,000 kilograms. that I would need to purchase. Now, it's a general rule, that's a good way to deal with inventory. Add any closing inventory and deduct any opening inventory. Or the other way to think of it here is, can you see that the level of inventory has increased? At the beginning of the month, we've got 100,000 kilograms. By the end of the month, we want 125,000 kilograms. If you want to increase your level of inventory, you'll need to purchase more than you're using. You can see here my purchases are indeed more than my use by the 25,000 kilograms difference. So in answer to my task here, I think I'm going to need to purchase 2,025,000 kilograms of materials. That will allow me to increase the level of inventory in my storeroom and then still have enough material that after wastage I can produce my 100,000 units. And if I wanted to convert that purchase figure from kilograms to pounds, all I'd need to do is multiply by the price per kilogram. So if my supplier was charging me £10 per kilogram, my total budgeted cost of material, well, 2,025,000 kilograms times £10 per kilogram would be £20,250,000. So we've got our two adjustments there, the wastage and the changes in inventory. Make sure you're capable of dealing with both of those. And I hope you found that useful.